Hello. It's a long weekend in Sydney. No better time than to share a few words on productivity. Now, let's start by making it quite clear that productivity is not about all of us working harder or longer hours. It's essentially about transforming inputs of labour and capital more efficiently and more effectively into outputs, whether in manufacturing or services. Very difficult concept to measure, but there are some standard measurements that are used around the world, and on these measurements, Australia has the lowest productivity growth now in the last 10 years for the last 60. Why is this important? Well, productivity has driven our living standards all around the world in the industrialized world for the last 250 years, since the Industrial Revolution. It is very important, and it's not surprising that associated with low productivity growth in Australia, we also see serious wage stagnation, real wage stagnation. The government is trying to alleviate that in various ways, but it won't work until we can restart the productivity motor. And what drives that? Well, historically, technological change and innovation. They're the central issues. You can fiddle around with tax, you can deregulate, you can do all sorts of things, but fundamentally it's about getting our technology and innovation system into a position where it can contribute effectively to economic growth and high skill, high productivity jobs. But we've gone backwards there. Our business expenditure on R&D has dropped to 0.89% of GDP. This is less than half the OECD average. Even Amazon spends more than 5 times Australia's entire Commonwealth spend on R&D in its own R&D programs. Not only that, but the research and innovation system is lagging also in its contribution from public expenditure. Overall, we're down to 1.68% of GDP. Again, way behind the OECD average. Some countries are, Korea, Japan, Switzerland, they're up at 4-5% of GDP. Especially since COVID, they know that the future of the world economy depends on knowledge-based products and services. But we won't be able to get to the government's target of 3% of GDP, which is about the OECD average, just by increasing public spending. We've got to develop a more complex economy, which will drive business expenditure in R&D. And if we look at the complexity of our economy as measured by the Harvard Atlas of Economic Complexity, which measures the diversity and research intensity of our export mix, we're way back now at number 105 out of 135 countries, behind Botswana. Now, what's going on there? Essentially, we have a very narrow trade and industrial structure based very largely on the export of unprocessed raw materials. We've got there at the expense of our manufacturing sector. Manufacturing in most countries in the world is the main source of business expenditure on R&D. And if we diminish our manufacturing, we're not going to get up to 3% or anywhere near that kind of expenditure of R&D, with all the spin-off effects, with all the networks and potential industry clusters that can create competitive advantage in global markets and value chains. Instead, we're just sending out raw materials which are valued by other countries, of course, and which provide us with a standard of living here. But for how long? When China switches the switch of its iron ore imports from Australia, say, to West Africa, that's 20-25% of our export mix gone in one hit. Then we've got thermal coal. How long will we be exporting thermal coal to the rest of the world? We're entirely dependent on other people's demand, which makes us very vulnerable, and also with commodity prices being very precarious. Of course, we got a tremendous windfall gain from China around 2010, 2012, which had an insatiable appetite for our iron ore and other resources. That certainly boosted our terms of trade, increased our living standards by around 15% over a 6-year period, but we squandered those proceeds. We spent them on a consumption boom and have nothing left at the end of that, just like the British did with the North Sea oil receipts. Whereas Norway took a 50% stake in their North Sea oil and gas assets, built the world's largest sovereign wealth fund, and now have, out of their tax of resources exports of 76%, resources rent tax, and now can fund the next 10 generations of R&D in Norway, plus their equivalent of the NDIS, plus free university, plus free healthcare. We missed all the possibility of doing that because we were mesmerized by letting this all get organized by the market. We decided against an interventionist industrial policy, and now we are facing the consequences, although the government is now rediscovering industrial policy in the Future Made in Australia strategy, the Net Zero plan. All of these may make a contribution, especially now that we have the opportunity of the energy transition. And this is our last chance saloon, because we have now unlimited resources of wind and solar that we can translate into new products, new low carbon, zero carbon products, green metals, critical minerals for the world's economy if we transform them here, and future value chains that are going to be essential to the world's needs in terms of technology and innovation. We have the chance now to build all of those things, and we have a group, the panel, doing the strategic examination of R&D, which will be considering what is the best way we can bring this about, and in that context to develop not manufacturing as we had it in the past. We've moved beyond sort of mass production, low-cost manufacturing. We're into high-value manufacturing, which is driven by digital, by AI, by all the new technological developments of the last 20 or 30 years that we can still manage to introduce in Australia because we have a strong research and development sector in our universities and in CSIRO. So how do we do this? The strategic examination of R&D is looking at this very closely. It's realized that we really need certainly to get better coordination of all the programs we currently have. We have about 150 budget line items across 14 government departments at the Commonwealth level, none of which connect with each other. How do we get a more coordinated approach? How do we use a mission-led approach to designing the priorities for the future? What problems do we need to solve? What capabilities do we have? Where are the current and future areas of competitive advantage in our economy beyond simply shipping out resources, iron ore, coal? What comes after that? Well, higher education, that's not going so well. International students. Tourism, very volatile. It's only after that that we get to manufacturing and agriculture, agri-food. These are the areas where we have some potential for growth, and we have the potential for developing the renewable technologies that will facilitate that growth in a net zero world. So coordination, a big part of it, getting focus in our programs. We need to develop a system. Instead of the fragmented and duplication that we have at the present time in our research and innovation system, how do we get some focus? How do we use foresighting to enable us to see where we want to be in the future? Some will say, well, you can't see into the future, and you can't pick winners, but we certainly don't want to be picking losers. We need to be able to make strategic bets. That's what the Harvard Atlas of Economic Complexity keeps telling Australia. Other countries are making strategic bets, but we're not. And that's the area that we need to get into. Not all of them will succeed, but we've got a lot of resources in the system. We've got the Future Made in Australia plan, as I mentioned. We've got the National Reconstruction Fund. We've got CSIRO, the CFC, ARENA, Capacity Investment Scheme, Rewiring Australia, Powering the Regions. That all adds up to about $80–90 billion. There's not a shortage of funding for grants, equity, loans, off budget and on budget. They're all available, but they need to be in areas of focus. And how do we do that at a place-based level? Well, that's where the strategic examination of R&D, the third panel, might be looking at the development of place-based innovation ecosystems. These are familiar around the world. The mothership is the Fraunhofer system in Germany. The UK have adopted something like that, maybe a bit more simply as the UK catapult network, especially the high-value manufacturing catapults. The US have some various versions of it, the Manufacturing USA Institutes, the National Science Foundation, regional innovation engines, the regional technology hubs, the microelectronics commons, and a lot of the state governments there are doing similar things. And in Australia, we do have some embryonic versions of innovation ecosystems, but we really need to do this on a much more systematic national scale and connect up CSIRO, universities, other research institutions as the R&D engine of these innovation ecosystems, which must be industry-led. They must be in standalone facilities, not on university campuses. They have to be led by industry, especially large industry. Foreign direct investment companies can be attracted, especially if there's good R&D going on, and they will connect also with the growth of SME supply chains in these innovation ecosystems. How do we fund all that? Well, as I said, we have a lot of money out there in the system. Much of that can be directed to making all of this work. We need to use the National Reconstruction Fund in particular effectively to invest in our research and innovation infrastructure around Australia. We need to use public procurement more cleverly, like the SBIR program in the US, and we need to build up our skills and capabilities in universities and in our vocational education and training sector. This is the way that we can, and which I believe we can, build the jobs and industries of the future in this country. Thank you.